drawing a small stone structure such as this tower is a great thing to do when we're learning to draw. Often they can be relatively simple geometric shapes, and that does make them very suitable. This drawing in real time is only going to take 10 minutes to do, and I'm using a 0.2mm pen, Copic multi-liner pen to do that. But the biggest challenge with drawing stone structures such as this, where the stonework is quite large, is that it can be difficult to work out how are we going to actually represent it so that it looks real enough and doesn't look overdone. A common problem with stonework such as this, particularly for drawing beginners, is that it's a detail, if you like, the divisions between the stone blocks where they're joined together are either totally left out, in which case the building looks very blank, when that's not what it's about. Or they're drawn in a lot of detail, which even if it's accurately drawn, all of the lines between the bricks, even if it's actually drawn, can look very heavy with ink, so that when we look at this tower in our drawing, all we see are the ink lines between the blocks. That's where the greatest concentration of ink is. And it makes, from a visual point of view, the thing that grabs our attention something that's not what grabs our attention in real life, which is still the overall shape of this building, of this tower. The other problem, of course, is that we don't get the lines between the bricks, the stones, blocks of stones lined up properly, and that causes a problem because then it doesn't look real, as well as perhaps looking way too dark, way too black. Because the truth is, in this case, the gaps between the stonework is actually slightly lighter. We see the lines of the stone courses because they're lighter in most cases than the stones around them. And yet we can't really, in a quick sketch, which is what this is intended to be, we can't represent that. So we only have black on white. So we can't draw exactly what we see. We have to get a compromise in somehow still creating the same effect with how our stonework looks without being able to copy it exactly. Now, when it comes to stonework, the other thing that's important is the silhouettes, the edges, and it depends a bit on what sort of condition the stonework is in. If it's very weathered stonework, there may be no sharp edges, no pointed corners, everything may be rounded or even chipped and very irregular, in which case, at least in parts, we need to try and capture that if our stonework is to look real. But this tower, this small tower, has weathered fairly well, so that's not so much of a problem. But one thing I think that we do want to do is we want to make the if you like, the silhouettes or the corners of our walls not hard, smooth, straight lines. Because the fact that every short distance there's a bit of mortar creates a slight dimple effect. And while, again, we don't want to be exaggerating that or even trying to draw it accurately for every spot between every block of stone, it's good to create the effect of that in parts. One challenging thing when we do have a stonework structure that is quite small, such as this one, is that we have to, besides getting the perspective angles correct, we probably have to make sure that we get the scale correct, the size of our block in relation to the overall structure, reasonably accurate. And we may actually have to suggest more of the stonework than we would if this were a much larger subject, especially if we were drawing at the same size and therefore the individual blocks of stone were relatively smaller. So see what I'm doing? These light lines I'm doing now in between the castellations, these are representing some of those in our reference light lines between the blocks of stone. But see how lightly I've drawn them, and they don't even continue from the top to the bottom. Now we have probably, in my thinking, the most complex part of this scene, which are these small brackets that sit around this edging that protrudes that the castellations on top sit on, which takes them out slightly wider than the diameter of the tower itself. Because I want this drawing to have the sense of being a quick sketch rather than a detailed drawing, I'm trying to keep all my lines fairly brisk. Now, there is no pencil under drawing here. This is a drawing directly in ink. So if this is something that you would like to explore and you don't at the moment, the thing to realize is that, and it's pretty obvious, that every mark we put on the paper will be there at the end of the drawing. We can't erase anything. And so we need to learn to draw in a way that we can put marks that will help us to position the elements before we draw them. And you'll see me often putting dots where I'm just positioning things. And now I'm doing some of this light line work for between the courses. And what happens in life is we often see slightly more detail at the corners, at where the corner of a block of stone joins another, because the corner setback often catches the shadow slightly more strongly. And so that's why I'm doing these lines, so that one part of it is darker than another, or some parts aren't even continued and there are some gaps, because it creates a lighter finish. Now, when we have stonework such as this around the doorway, it's really important that we observe carefully and get it correct. And this is the sort of detail that might be worth just experimenting on a scrap of paper first to see if we can get the pattern to look realistic enough. So you can certainly see now my approach. The possibly bigger challenge is going to be on the round tower, because we're going to have to curve those lines according to the perspective angles. And those horizontal lines around the cylinder of the tower are going to curve upwards above eye level, and they're going to curve downwards below eye level, and they're going to be straight at eye level. Or they would be straight at eye level if eye level is actually where one of them is. Now, eye level in this scene, if we look at those straight lines on the tower, those horizontal lines rather, we can see that the coursework line is almost straight just below that triangular pediment in that front porch. Just slightly below that, it would have been straight. So that's where we're going to have approximately a straight line. And it's up higher than the door, because I was standing up high looking down somewhat on this tower, or at least down at the ground level, and looking up slightly at the top of the tower. So eye level is very high. And you can see how as I go down with these marks and how lightly I'm making them, you can see how they become rounder and rounder. Now we have a bit of fussy detail here with these railings, these wooden railings. And now I'm not trying to draw these in too much detail, but I want to give the suggestion that they're three-dimensional sticks of wood. But I don't want to draw them so that, again, there's so much ink so closely together that it creates a darkness that draws our attention, and we look down there rather than at the castle. But they do provide compositionally a wonderful little entrance towards the arch of the tower. A bit like a funnel that visually funnels our attention towards the main subject. Please hit the like button if you're finding this helpful. I'll post this reference photo on my channel posts page, the old community page. There'll be a link in the description that will take you to that reference if you, after you've watched this, want to have a go drawing it yourself. Can I suggest that you don't have my photo, my drawing up while you draw your copy, But draw your copy trying to remember what I've said and then compare it with what I've done. And if you want to, consider what might you have done differently. You see me there just trying not to have a hard, smooth edge down there, but create a more varied emphasis and some very quick gestural lines for this tree that sits behind. And I really just want to make sure that we can see that it goes behind the tower, because that will push the tower forward a bit. And it's the same with that foliage that I've done that's on that far ridge in the distance that sort of goes behind the tower. And I haven't been drawn into the detail that we see otherwise, because that will just clutter what I think is a lovely simple shape of this colonial era stone tower in the Australian town of Port Arthur in Tasmania. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Hope you enjoyed this. Why not have a go drawing it? Or at least putting this into practice, this technique for stonework, in the next castle-like drawing you do. But whatever you do, however you do it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.